Well, as we speak about ruling and get more practical about the matter, we will begin from the most inner circle and work outward. You know, one has circles of influence. That which is in your immediate circle is that which you have direct influence of. That which is in the circle outside of that is indirect influence. And of course, there are things outside of those circles in which you have no influence. It's fair when Jesus says, do not worry, because the things that are in your immediate circle of influence, you are to influence and not worry about. That which is in your intermediate circle of influence or indirect influence, you're not to worry about those things, you are to influence them. But the things outside of your circle of influence, you're not to worry about, because there's nothing you can do about it. So let's start looking at ruling from the most innermost circle, and we'll work our way out as we go from there. Let's start with this interesting passage from Matthew 7, where Jesus says, do not judge, or you will be judged. For with the same measurement you pronounce, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye, but fail to notice the beam in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, while there is still a beam in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the beam out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. When it reads as don't, when it says do not judge, that word don't or do not is not an absolute negation. It's not in the original language saying you absolutely must not or may not. It's more used as a caution to say be cautious in doing so. There are concerns, there are cautions to consider. Then it says that word judge is the word krino, which really means to govern and come to a choice or decision. It speaks of a picture of separating the wheat from the chaff, making a decision and governing in a way. It says the measure you use in this is the same measure that is applied to you, and that is the caution. The caution is not to say no judgment should take place, because as we know by now, the Lord tells us to judge all things. But in judging concerning those that God has given us rule over, and where we have an influence in their life, in this matter, the Lord says, be careful of the measure you use, because that is the measure that first must measure you. The word metron is the word measurement. So before you separate the wheat from the chaff and make decisions concerning others, whom let's assume now that the Lord has put them in your, not just circle of influence, but He's put them under your rule. In judging those matters, first be cautioned. There is a standard that measures you. And that standard, that measurement, then once applied to your life by you, then you can use that standard in applying it to others. The caution is you cannot be using a standard, applying it to others, if you have not first applied it to your own life. When it speaks of the speck or the beam in your eye, that word eye is very often used as a figurative picture of your mind's eye, what is in your heart. As in Ephesians 1 verse 18, let the eyes of your understanding be opened. It's the window to your soul. It's not just when you look at it and I can see your feelings. No, it really reflects something which is going on within you. And so that's why it's talking about what's really going on deep within you in your soul. And it says if you do not do that accurately, you are a hypocrite. Very interesting, the word hypocrite is made up of two words, hypo and krino. Now, krino is the word we've just used to speak of judgment. Hypo means under judgment. So a hypocrite is under judgment. But the word really means an actor who wears a mask to portray a certain character. That mask that they're wearing is not who they are. They are portraying a different character as to who the real person is. You are false and fake person, and the fake person is actually under judgment because you are portraying a standard that judges you, that you have not come up to. So, as we move on, last session we spoke about elders who rule. We spoke about that being a principle of the 24 elders around the throne. And we said that word presbyteros or presbyteros is a mature man having seasoned judgment. A mature man that has seasoned judgment. Now, Titus 2 verse 2 speaks of these elders, these presbyteros, these mature senior men, and he says, older men, which is the word presbyteros, are to be temperate, dignified, self-controlled, and sound in faith, love, and perseverance. I want to speak and focus a little bit on this word, self-controlled. These mature men that are ruling with seasoned judgment are to be self-controlled. Other translations use the translation sober-minded. It means exactly that. The word is nephalios, which means sober-minded. It's made up of the word sophron, which is a safe mind or a sound mind that exercises prudence and moderation, that exercises inner restraint, that has the ability to govern self with godly wisdom and spiritual discipline. This is the word sophron. And the root of that word is phron or phren. So that sophron, the root of that is the word phren, from which we get diaphragm. And it refers to the diaphragm, that innermost part that regulates you from within. Very often people now speak of your core. You must focus on strengthening your core, and you operate from your core even in exercises and in athletics. Your core must be from where your strength comes. Well, this core is your diaphragm. And in a spiritual sense, it is also the innermost working that should regulate your behavior. So a sober-minded man is one who is safe, sound-minded, because he's regulated from within. Keep that in mind. We'll come back to that as we look at these passages of Scripture. Now, 2 Peter 1 from verse 3 to 7 says, and it reiterates and speaks of this promise that we have been speaking about, that the covenant produced for us. But it says, His divine power has given us everything we need for life and godliness through the knowledge of Him who called us by His own glory and excellence. Through these, He has given us His precious and magnificent promise. The promises that through them you may become partakers of the divine nature. Now that you have escaped the corruption in the world caused by evil desires. For this very reason, make every effort to add to your faith virtue, and to virtue knowledge, and to knowledge self-control, and to self-control perseverance, and to perseverance godliness, and to godliness brotherly kindness. We see God encouraging us to develop this character that is the nature and character of our Father. And with this comes this word self-control. It's a different word to what we've just looked at. It's the word enkratia. It's spelled with a G and pronounced with a N. Enkratia, which means to be strong, masterful, as in mastering, ruling over, the ability to rule. It means you exercise restraint over self-desire, over your own desires, over your own impulses and emotions and thoughts, and you align them with God's will and standard. This is the word enkratia, self-control. And as we know, self-control is part of the fruit of the Spirit. The Spirit of God gives us self-control. Galatians 5 verse 22 and 23. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Enkratia. Against such there is no law. Now the root of this word, enkratia, is the word kratos, with which we are familiar because we know the cosmocrator is the one who is the ruler of this world. Cosmo, world, cosmos, kratos, ruler. And so we see this is a picture of rulership, but it is rulership mastering from within. It is not an external ruling that rules you, but it is from within that there is rulership taking place. And so now we see this word, the rulership from within, connecting with the word nephalios, sober-minded, and the diaphragm, the word phren, which means to be regulated from within. Your inner life must regulate you. Now, as children, we are not naturally self-controlled. And Proverbs 22 verse 15, I used to quote this to my children often, along with one or two other scriptures when I would administer the wooden spoon of understanding to their seat of knowledge. And I would quote this to them: "Foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child, but the rod of discipline drives it far from him." Proverbs 22 verse 15. The rod of discipline drives it from him. Naturally, we are foolish. I used to tell my children that as a child, you are foolish. You don't know anything. You are ignorant. I am your father, and I've been tasked with the responsibility of bringing understanding to you, wisdom, understanding, and by training and discipline. We'll speak more about this later as we speak of ruling over our children. But it brings them to a place of being disciplined and foolishness being removed from their hearts. Now, I used to tell my boys, particularly whenever they were sent to the bathroom, and we cleansed them from their disobedience, and then I would say to them, "My boy, I do not like to discipline you. I do not like to have to do this, but I'll never have to do it again if you discipline yourself." In other words, I only have to discipline you because the things I've told you and instructed you in, you have not paid attention to, you've not been obedient in, you've been disobedient, and you've willfully rebelled against that instruction that I've given you. And because of that, I have to administer discipline to train you up. If, however, you were to discipline yourself in these matters and simply obey, I never ever have to discipline you again. Wouldn't that be wonderful? And the truth is, self-discipline doesn't come just by yourself. There are fathers that are needed to bring discipline. But the sooner you align with this discipline, the sooner you align with the wisdom that God brings through this discipline, the quicker you do not have to come under the rod of discipline, because you have become self-disciplined. And this is the mark of maturity, isn't it? That you no longer need to be disciplined because you have brought yourself under that measure, under the discipline, under the standard of Christ that is required. So, when you're raising up a child, the goal is really to get the principles on the inside of him. You want him to internalize that these principles, these values, these standards become part of who that child is. It becomes that which rules from the inside. Now, the danger of not being self-governed or governed from within is that whenever you come into a position of ruling over others, your immaturity would cause you really to abuse others, because you are still dealing with issues or have not dealt with issues that rule over you in your emotions, in your soul. And because you've not dealt with them, they rule over you. And when you are dealing with others, these things, these issues in you, unresolved and undisciplined issues, become the things that erupt and cause abuse to those who are under your rule. So it's actually a curse, a terrible thing to be ruled over by someone who is not self-disciplined, who is not yet a mature man that is self-governed. Ecclesiastes 10 verse 6 actually says, "Woe to you, O land, when your king is a child and your princes feast in the morning." It speaks of this immaturity that becomes such a burden and a blight on those who are ruled over by that. Now, as we move on, the principle of being faithful in the little, if you are faithful in the little, you will be made ruler over much. Although that applies specifically in the millennium and in eternity as we rule and reign with Christ, it doesn't only apply in those circumstances. The principle also applies while we are here in the temporal realm, while we are here on earth. And so if you are faithful in ruling over the little that God has given you to rule over in the earth, He promotes you and will give you more to rule over here in the earth, in the temporal realm. So the little that you must start with in ruling over must be your own life. We are well aware that your life consists of spirit, soul, and body. Zoe life, Suke life, and Bios life. Now, you cannot produce Zoe life or rule over it in yourself. The Zoe life is a life that is produced and comes alive, is animated, if you want, by the Spirit of God when you are reconciled to your Father. And His Spirit now animates or brings life to a dormant spirit, and you are born again. Your spirit now comes alive and can receive from the Spirit of God that illumination and understanding and instruction that comes to your spirit. You cannot produce that life, nor do you rule over that spirit. What happens is the Spirit of God rules in and through you by His Spirit in your spirit. So He rules, God rules by His Spirit in your spirit, and He is the one, God, who produces that life in you by His Spirit. And He rules over your spirit. Self-discipline, self-rule, self-governance takes place not by you ruling your spirit, as we've just said. Your spirit is ruled by God, and your spirit is animated and illuminated by God. But self-rule takes place when you rule over your soul and bring your soul in submission to your spirit that is ruled by God. Most human beings that have not been born again are absolutely ruled by their spirit, and that's where the enemy is the master manipulator, able to control circumstances that appeal to your soul. And so he can manipulate all circumstances and pull you around, literally lead you by your nose by appealing to your soul and controlling and manipulating you within your soul. So the unregenerated man, one that is not born again, one that is not led by the Spirit of God, is led and controlled and ruled by the soul, which the enemy controls. Now God says, I have reconciled you to myself. My Spirit now illuminates and animates and gives life to your spirit. Your spirit now receives truth and life and light. Your spirit now should instruct your soul as to how to live. This is how self-control, self-discipline, self-rule takes place. Because God has given us autonomy over our own life. You have the choice as to your own life. You could almost think that you can rule and have authority over your own life, but autonomy and authority is not the same thing. Autonomy is the right to choose. When you choose accurately, according to your choice, God will authorize and give authority to you in your life. If you're not choosing correctly, even though you have autonomy, you are separated from the one who has all authority, and you have no authority in your life. So we've got that. But authority in your life, even though you have the autonomy to choose, the right and the freedom to choose to obey God or not, God can, if He wants to, He can remove your mind. That part of you that chooses and has autonomy to reason and to choose against God, if God wants to, and there are circumstances like with Nebuchadnezzar that God actually removed his mind. Daniel 4 verse 25. Daniel then speaks over Nebuchadnezzar and tells him, you will be driven away from mankind, and your dwelling will be with the beasts of the field. You will feed on grass like an ox and be drenched with the dew of heaven, and 7 times shall pass you by until you acknowledge that the Most High rules over the kingdom of mankind and gives it to whom He wishes. So God literally made Nebuchadnezzar lose his mind, his faculties, even that which decides against God. God said, I'm going to remove that from you until such time that you acknowledge that I rule over the kingdom of mankind, and I give it to whom I wish. So the point is, God gives you autonomy, but you only have authority in your life to operate when you come under His rule and your spirit aligns with His will, His ways, His rule, and you discipline your flesh to bring it under submission. Your flesh is really a combination of that bios, your life, your body, and your soul. Your body follows where your soul goes, but it wants certain things, and your soul, your choice, can choose to pander to the flesh or choose to align with the Spirit of God. A self-controlled man, a sober-minded man, one who rules well over his own life, is one who has disciplined his soul, his flesh, to come in submission. As Paul said in 1 Corinthians 9 verse 27, I discipline my body, or my flesh, and make it my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified. That word discipline literally means I give my flesh a black eye. I punish it. I give it a black eye, is what it means, literally. And make it my slave, doulos. It is brought under servitude of my spirit, so that I will not be disqualified. Which means, so that I will not, after being tested, found wanting. When the metal is proved and it's seen it's not pure gold, that it'll be discarded. Paul says, I want to be qualified. And so I will discipline, even give my flesh a black eye if needed. I will harshly discipline my flesh and bring it under the rule of the Spirit, because I want to be ruled from within. Enkrateia. I want to be sober-minded. I want to be regulated from the inner man, my spirit man, Nephalios. And so the one who rules well can only do so when you yourself are appropriately under rule. Or one who rules well can only do so when you are appropriately under the rule of another. There is only one who has all authority and all power, and so we know who the other is. The one ultimately who rules over us is Christ. And his standard must rule. And if you are not ruled over by that standard, if your life is not appropriately under his rule, under the rule of Christ, you cannot rule well, and you cannot be entrusted with more. As you love yourself, you love your wife. Husbands, love your wives even as you love yourself. If self is not ruled, how do you rule others? If you do not come under God's love for you, how do you love others? Do you see, when you as husbands understand how Christ loves you and gave himself for you, you can then enter into ruling well and loving your wife even as Christ loved you. But it says, as you love yourself. So yourself must first be placed under the rule and under the discipline that is Christ. And then you can rule well. And in all that ruling, it is the Spirit of God, the Spirit of wisdom, the Spirit of understanding, the Spirit of knowledge, the Spirit of might and power, the fear of the Lord. It is the Spirit of God that enables you to rule well, because you have come under submission to the Spirit. And so David says in Psalm 139, verse 23 and 24, he says, search me, O God, and know my heart, know my innermost workings. Test me and know my concerns. See if there be any offensive way in me. Lead me in the way everlasting. Everlasting here speaks of the eternal, unchanging way, will, purpose of God. And if God leads us, if we are ruled by him in his eternal, unchanging ways, unchanging will, unchanging purpose, if you are led by that, if you are governed by that, if you are ruled by that, and you place yourself under that rule, if that becomes the standard and the measure by which you measure yourself, then you can be entrusted with more. And then you can qualify to lead others. If he leads you in his everlasting way, you can lead others. If he rules over you and your spirit, brings your soul under submission, then you can rule well as he appoints you a jurisdiction. We'll talk more about this as we continue. God bless.